We're going to go ahead and kind of kick the third webinar off, y'all. This is the third of four total, webinar sessions that we're having this year for Coastal Industry Week. We've got some folks from the master plan team that work in planning and research at CPRA here to present with you. We got Dr. Krista Jankowski and Eric White of the master plan section. They're going to be presenting on the master plan data viewer and data accessibility features that we have in the 2023 plan. Want to thank everybody for coming. Let y'all know this is being recorded. We are going to be taking questions throughout. So in the event anyone's got anything they want to get clarification on, any questions, comments, anything like that, just feel free to put them into the chat box. We'll be monitoring them throughout, and we should have some time for questions afterwards. With that, y'all, it's been a big year for our organization. Not only was our annual plan recently approved by our board for submission to the legislature, so was our 2023 edition of the master plan. And we've got two highly qualified and intelligent individuals to tell you anything and everything you want to know about that. And with that, I'm gonna kick it over to Dr. Jankowski.
All right, well, thank you, Jacques. And for those of you who may have been expecting Stu Brown to be presenting this, he is currently sitting and waiting in the Senate Transportation Committee room, waiting to have that committee hear whether or not they want to move forward with approval of the master plan. So he's doing that important work. So Eric and I are here to talk to you about the master plan data viewer and data accessibility related to 2023 coastal master plan. This is a slide that if you see presentations on the master plan, you're going to see this slide, and we like to just use it to really sort of lay the groundwork of what the coastal master plan is and make sure everyone's on the same page with that. As you may know, the coastal master plan really is a prioritization effort for the state of Louisiana, and we update it every 6 years. And we try to answer the question of how can the state spend its money most cost effectively over the next 50 years in order to reduce storm surge-based flood risk and restore and maintain coastal wetlands. And so that process ensures adaptive management because we're revisiting these questions and the work we want to do in order to achieve these goals every 6 years. We're able to look at what has worked, what lessons we've learned through implementing projects through other divisions in CPRA. We're also able to incorporate new science and data that is available, that comes available throughout these processes that maybe weren't available while we were building our models or conducting our analyses for the previous master plan. We're able to incorporate those into the next master plan. So it is built on world-class science and engineering that includes the understandings and skill sets of the team here at CPRA, but also scientists, engineers, and other experts from across the state and across the nation who we interact with in terms of our contracting partners to do some of the work, as well as folks on our advisory team. So really a large group effort to make this master plan process happen. Each master plan, we are working to advance a comprehensive and integrated approach to restoration and risk reduction. We work to incorporate extensive public input and review. So throughout the development process, we're meeting with advisory groups, we're going out into communities and talking with folks, having community conversations, really trying to make sure that folks have a chance to look at the work we're doing while it's being done, and have influence on that process to the degree that we can incorporate that. And then really this last bullet point is really important, is that along with having this prioritization effort for looking at these risk and restoration projects, we also use the master plan to illustrate how people and communities will experience a changing coast, and to allow them to have preparation and adaptation into the future. So the master plan is a list of projects, but it's also more than that. Within the coastal master plan, we use a number of predictive models in order to look at different aspects of the coastal environment through our integrated compartment model, looking at hydrology, looking at vegetation, a lot of different aspects there. We also are interested in storm surge based flooding. So we incorporate storm surge and wave models that give us an idea of how different hurricanes and tropical storms that may come across the coast may impact the landscape. And we also look at risk across the coast. So risk from those storms and from storm surge based flooding associated with those through the CLARA model, the Coastal Louisiana Risk Assessment Model, and look at how assets along the coast, residences, businesses, things like that may be impacted from storms and from land loss and change of the coastal environment over time. So we use these three different models, which all have sub-routines, and Eric can answer questions about these models pretty effectively later if they come up. But we use these models to really look at what we might expect over the next 50 years under a number of scenarios, and what types of projects we may want to implement on the ground to try and reduce that land loss and that storm surge based flooding. Excuse me. Through the process for the 2023 Coastal Master Plan, we did put together a list of 65 restoration projects and 12 structural risk reduction projects. So those structural risk reduction projects are going to be levees, floodgates, those types of things. And then we also identified that about $11 billion of a total $50 billion budget would best be spent reducing risk through non-structural risk reduction measures. So that's things like elevating residences, flood-proofing residences and commercial buildings, and in some cases, voluntary acquisition of properties. The map here is showing the sort of spread of those projects across the coast. And you can see there are a lot of different types of projects. So we have marsh creation, which constitutes the largest portion of our restoration budget, land bridges, ridge restorations, and then we have our structural and non-structural risk reduction projects as well. But again, I said this before, and I wanted to go ahead and hit it here again, that the master plan is more than just a list of projects, right? It is guidance for the state on how to implement projects that will have impacts on the lives, livelihoods, and experience of Louisianans across the coast. And so really we're looking at how the actions we take now can, over the next 50 years, impact industry, impact recreation, impact our homes, our jobs, and our culture here along the coast. So really what the bulk of this presentation is meant to focus on is a set of tools and resources that we on the master plan team have put together and are in the process of putting together to help communicate the plan and all of the information beyond that list of projects. And so I'm going to walk through a few of those, and then Eric will continue that conversation. So essentially, once the master plan has been submitted to the CPRA board and then to the legislature, we don't stop our process of trying to continue outreach and engagement with the public on the master plan. There isn't really a stopping point in that six-year cycle of developing and talking about the master plan. So currently we are in a phase of continued outreach on the plan. We really want to continue educating folks about sort of the projects, but also about the different information that is available in the master plan. And we're trying to do that through a series of tools. In a few different methods. So one way is just through informal conversations, or being, we get called from time to time that there's a group or an organization that would like one of us to come talk to them, going out and having those conversations and explaining information about where land loss may be impacting the coast into the future, what that might mean for a community or for an individual. Those types of conversations are ongoing. We're looking to partner with libraries, similar to what happened after the 2017 master plan was released, to provide them with copies of the master plan document, with copies of associated materials, and and just have those libraries host those materials to make sure that they're accessible at different places physically around the coast, recognizing that not everyone has access to reliable internet. And so maybe accessing the document online isn't as easy for some folks, but maybe they can get to their local library and see that. So we're working to get that set up and organized so those materials can be hosted across the coast, and actually across the state. We are going to be providing training on a tool that we have updated for the 2023 master plan process, which is the master plan data viewer. You may recall the master plan data viewer that was an accompaniment to the 2017 plan. We have updated and renewed the sort of visualizations, the amount of data, the type of data, and the information that's available on that. And I'll actually walk you through accessing that data viewer in just a moment here. You can kind of see a mock-up of it on a cell phone here, which we were able this time around to actually update it to make that data viewer mobile friendly. So you don't have to necessarily be stationary at a desk to get access to the data viewer with a lot of the information that is produced in the master plan process. You can be out, and if you have mobile internet, you can tool around on there on your phone, which makes it more accessible to more people. And then also we're planning to present aspects of the plan at different conferences. Stay of the Coast is going to be coming up in New Orleans at the end of May, early June. And there will be a number of sessions at that conference that are going to provide information about the master plan or different analyses that are associated with it, as well as some other conferences. And then I do just want to point out sort of the cover shot here of our executive summary, which is a new resource that we just came out with when we submitted to the legislature. So there is, in addition to the 200-page master plan document itself, we do have a slightly condensed 20-page executive summary that can provide information to folks who kind of want to get it in a little bit more condensed version. So as I mentioned, we have the master plan data viewer, and I'm going to go ahead and switch over to that now and kind of give a little run through of how that can be used and kind of some of the information that's there. And that will parlay us into these project fact sheets. That's another tool that is accessible both on the data viewer, but then on the CPRA website. So I'm going to switch the view here. And this is the landing page for the 2023 Coastal Master Plan Data Viewer. We have the URL is mpdv.coastal.la.gov, so folks can access it there. And when you get onto the data viewer, you are presented with a link to the master plan document itself, an email address where you can email the master plan team for questions. And then you have two options of how you want to interact with the viewer. So either start a guided tour, which is really great for first-time users or folks who want to sort of understand what some of the capabilities of the website are. And then we also have the Explore the Map functionality, where if you've been to the site before or you just kind of want to go check it out for yourself, you can click there. I'm not going to spend the time to walk through the entire guided tour. I'll allow folks to explore that on their own, but I do want to show that once you're in the guided tour, you're taken to see this navigation pane in the lower corner. You're presented with narrative about historical land loss, and you can kind of use sliders and tools there to see how land loss has occurred in the past. You can click through and look at different sort of master plan outputs, such as land change over time, and you can toggle between different environmental scenarios that were used in the analysis and for project selection within the master plan. We have information on flood depths. Again, that's storm surge based flooding. And here you can look at different annual exceedance probabilities. So flood depths that would occur from storms with different sort of probabilities of happening in any given year. And then we also have other data available on the site, including damage information from those storms in different metrics. So in dollars, or in number of structures for areas affected, as well as the ability to look at how projects that are proposed in the 2023 master plan would come online over time. So those are some of the features there. We also have some other functionality, including the ability to go ahead and, if you know a particular project that you're interested in, you can use the search functionality to go ahead and search for that project. You'll be zoomed in to that project. You can see the other projects that are around it. You'll have a navigation pane that gives you information about that project, including sort of the region that it's in, the year that our master plan assumes its implementation, the project number, and then really importantly, these project fact sheets, which are PDFs that you can access that provide more detailed information on a particular project. So here from Merganza to the Gulf, we have an example of that fact sheet, which provides a description, cost, project benefit information, again, a map, and these can be printed out and used for informational purposes, sharing those with folks who may be interested, as well as because this is a structural risk reduction project, we do have information about flood risk in the area, what the impact of this project is on damage, again, in those two metrics in dollars or structural equivalents, as well as some information about the assets that would be protected by the implementation of this project in that project area. So we have that for each of the projects within the master plan. So if we were to click on a different project here, a restoration project, again, we can see another fact sheet there that provides us with similar information on project benefits and cost and duration in that project location. So those are available through the master plan data viewer, as well as on our website within the technical appendices for the master plan. You can also download the entire suite of project fact sheets. So again, I encourage folks to explore the data viewer, really see what type of information you may be interested in, look at you know, the impacts of without the plan and with the plan, and see changes over time. Really, there's a lot of different ways to look at a lot of different data. So I want to just encourage folks to take some time and explore that data viewer. And then beyond the project fact sheets, I do also just want to mention that we have a number of other fact sheets. This is just an example of a parish level fact sheet, where we have more information about the parish, including the population of that parish that's within our model domain and is impacted by the master plan projects, and it has analysis for future conditions. We have community level fact sheets, regional level fact sheets, and these are all, again, going to be up, if they aren't currently there, they will be shortly updated onto the technical appendices associated with the master plan. It can be accessed on our website. So that's what I have for you, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Eric White, who's going to talk about a few other ways to get at the information associated with the master plan.
Okay, thank you, Krista. Yeah, so my name is Eric White. I'm a research engineer here at CPRA in the Planning and Research Division. And I'm going to talk here a bit more about the data and data availability that's sort of a little bit more granular and technocratic than some of the slick summary sheets and things that we've talked about so far. And so the first thing that we're going to talk about are an upcoming data product called the community data sheets. And so this is going to provide tabular information for each of the master plan communities that we use to assess flood risk and damages for in the 2023 master plan. And so here's some screenshots here of just what sort of information is included on those. But these are accessible or will be accessible through the current master plan data viewer. And they're sort of a stopgap right now to provide tabular information at really sort of high resolution, like spatial resolution, and then at multiple years with and without the master plan before we get to the data access portal, which is something that we're actively working on. But the point here is these community data sheets are going to include expected annual damages in both terms of dollar damages and structural damages, where we sort of take into account, we remove the sort of home asset to sort of have a more equitable look at flood risk and potential planned benefits across the coastal zone. And so we're looking at and providing this expected annual damages at each community, broken out by asset type. So we look at 5 different structural assets when we're doing risk assessment modeling for the master plan. We look at sort of small residential, so single family homes and duplexes, multifamily residential, so that'd be apartment buildings or sort of 3 or 4 like a quad type apartment building. We also look at commercial, industrial, and agricultural structures. We look at other structures, so things like education or other public buildings or religious houses. And then we also have non-structural assets such as crops or vehicles and roads that do account for economic damages when we do our damage modeling. And so we're breaking out sort of the damages by each of those asset types per community, and then also sum totaling those across the community, across all asset types. And we're going to be reporting this out at both the initial conditions, and then we're going to look at future without action at years 20 and at year 50. We will look at future with the master plan's structural risk reduction project. So if we build a levee or flood wall or other structural risk reduction project in or near that community, the damages will be reduced ideally. And so that would be the future with master plan. And then we also incorporate non-structural risk reduction measures and report those out here as well. So with the non-structural, that looks at, as Krista mentioned, 3 different types of non-structural mitigation, either flood proofing structures that have less than 2 feet of flooding, elevating homes that have between 2 and 12 feet of flooding, and then if they have greater than 12 feet of flood exposure, then they would be candidates for voluntary acquisition. And so we look at what structures meet each of those sort of mitigation measures, and then we can reduce the risk accordingly, assuming that those structures participate in the non-structural mitigation efforts. And so we look at those non-structural efforts either applied to initial conditions. We can look at them applied to a future without action at years 20 and 50. So just non-structural and no levees or flood walls or other structural projects on the landscape. And then we can also look at the non-structural mitigation on top of the structural levees that have been built in the future with master plan. So we might not reduce all of the risk because of a structural project. And so we can further mitigate that by assuming additional non-structural projects on top of that. And so we sort of are providing this information at every community across the 50-year time frame. So residents or parish officials or community officials can look and see what sort of benefits can be realized from these non-structural efforts, either with or without the master plan in place, so they can start sort of corralling funding and programs to start implementing non-structural projects as soon as possible. We also provide sort of just the count of structures that are sort of candidates for each of these mitigation measures in the non-structural program, as well as the total costs if all of these structures participated and were mitigated using those types of projects. And then finally, another data set that we have in these community data sheets are a count of structures that are exposed to various levels of flooding at different exceedance probabilities. So we can say, look at a 10% annual exceedance probability flood or a 1 in 10 year event, and count the number of structures, again, by asset type, that are sort of within the vicinity of flooding. So there's flooding on the ground level, but not necessarily at the first floor elevation. We can look at structures that have moderate exposure to flooding, which in our sort of parlance, we're referring to less than 3 feet of flooding on the first floor elevation. So even if a home is elevated It might still have flooding above the first floor elevation. And then we're also counting severe exposure to flooding, which would be greater than 3 feet of flooding above the first floor elevation. And so for years, initial conditions, years 20, year 50, future with and without the master plan, and then looking at the 10%, the 1%, the 0.5% of vents, counting the number of structures in each community that are exposed, moderately exposed, or severely exposed to flooding. And in addition to those residential and commercial structures and asset types that we were talking about before, for the exposure tables, we've also added historic properties and counting the number of historic properties that have moderate or severe flooding. And then we've also examined critical infrastructure across a variety of categories, including schools and daycares, hospitals, nursing homes, emergency services, water, drinking water supply, gas stations, and then also power and electrical power supply locations, and counting the number of those critical infrastructure assets that are also exposed to flooding. And so all of those sort of tabulations of exposure and flood damages are provided with these community data sheets. These are will soon be, hopefully tomorrow, will be posted to the master plan data viewer. And so you can see, if we were in the data viewer that Krista was just clicking through and we were looking at the damages tab, those damages are displayed in the map form in color for each of the master plan communities. So you can see the different shades of purple there, outlining the different communities that we examined. And if you were to click on that community, first you will see the expected annual damages here showing in dollars for the lower environmental scenario, with and without master plan as it changes over time. So for this community, which is the Mandeville Covington area in St. Tammany Parish on the North Shore, you can see sort of the initial conditions, dollar expected annual damages. And then after, once we get to year 10, 20, 30, and 40, and 50, you can see a reduction in those damages when the plan is in place with that light green compared to the tealish blue color. And so that's the sort of rolled up expected annual damage benefits that we would get in these communities. But then you can see there's also a button sort of at the bottom right there, which is going to be a link to the PDF version of these community data sheets, where you can download sort of this data that I just covered in sort of great detail. This, as I mentioned previously, these community data sheets are sort of a stopgap right now, while to provide more detailed information on flood risk and non-structural projects, while we currently are developing what we're calling the data access portal, or the MPDAP, to use an acronym for it. But this is a new portal that is being built on sort of the same skeletal structure as the current data viewer, with the same folks that we've been working with at the Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center to build an additional data viewer, but also to provide access for downloading this data. And so we're going to have all of the sort of model data for future without action and future with master plans posted here. And we're going to be able to map it and show it in spatial form. And we have, you can sort of see a mock-up there. We do have a beta version where there's a slider sort of capability. So if you're looking at two scenarios, say 1 year future without action and 1 year future with the master plan in place, you can sort of slide this slider across the map and see direct differences between those two data sets in real time in the viewer. There are sort of various, depending on which data set you're looking at, there's going to be a variety of variables that you can choose from to display. So if we were looking at, say, risk flood damage data in this viewer, you would be able to switch between scenarios of, say, pumping capacity assumptions. So in our analysis, we look at 3 different pumping capacities for internally for forced drainage areas and poldered levees. And so we can say, what would this flood damage look like if the pumps are fully functional and 100% capacity, and compare that to if they were only at 50% capacity or if the pumps were not working at all. And so those sort of variables are something that you would be able to select across. This data access portal will be a place where you can download this data in addition to the viewing of it. We're going to have some bulk downloads where you might, I think we're talking about probably having like some FTP access where you can navigate yourself to sort of the tranche of data that we have, and you can select and download things in bulk. Or you also will be able to download things by subsetting a region of the map. Here we have a mock-up of water levels from two different regions, sort of in the Central Coast there, in the basin up by Lake Barrett, I suppose that is, and down by Wax Lake Outlet. And you can sort of, if by selecting those, you would also then be able to view the time series of those data in a sort of real-time graph, but you would also be able to download just those few time series that you're interested in. We are planning on providing training once this resource is finalized and made public to researchers, academics, NGO partners, really anybody who's interested in viewing the data in more sort of granular and detailed versions than we have in the data viewer, the master plan data viewer that is currently active. A preliminary list of the data that we're going to be made available in the DAP. First of all will be the model grids for each of our models. So whether it be the ICM for the landscape modeling and water level, salinity, that type of information, or the ADCIRC grid that we use to model hurricanes and storm surge. Those model grids will be easily accessible here in the data access portal. We're also going to provide links to our initial conditions landscape. So as part of the master plan, working with our partners, we always update using satellite imagery and LiDAR and bathymetric sounding data. We build out full updated rasters of the landscape in coastal Louisiana. So that's going to include things like the land water composition. So what exactly is land, what is water? Like I mentioned, the topobathymetric digital elevation model, as well as the vegetation classifications across the coastal zone. In addition to those model grids and initial conditions, we're also going to, as I mentioned, be providing outputs from our Future Without Action and Future with Master Plan model runs. Portion of this data will be in raster form, so that would be the land, water, landscape in any given model year. The model changes to the elevation, the model changes to vegetation coverage, the flood depths, which are something that you saw in the master plan data viewer that Krista stepped through, as well as outputs from our ecosystem services components of the model, which we use habitat suitability indices for about 18, I believe, different species of commercially important fish and shellfish, as well as gaming species and waterfowl, as well as coastal wildlife such as alligators and other birds of importance to the coastal zone, like the seaside sparrow and the bald eagle. In addition, from the sort of landscape modeling side, we're going to be able to download, as I mentioned, the daily time series of water levels, salinity, temperature, tidal range, so how much tidal fluctuation we have, not just mean water levels, daily total suspended sediment as we've modeled it, and then some annual data such as annual amounts of mineral sediment deposition in open water bodies or on the marsh surface, annual organic matter accretion of vegetated wetland areas, and then also tabulated values of the annual land area in coastal Louisiana. So sort of those predictions of land loss with and without the master plan in place will all be available for downloading from this portal. And then when we get to the risk data, as I mentioned on those community data sheets, the sort of the wide range of risk with respect to expected annual damages in dollars or structures, as well as the different exposure counts. All of that will be available for download in addition to the years 20 and 50 and initial conditions that we have on the data sheets. We'll have it for any of the decades where we've actually assessed flood damages in our modeling outcomes. And then, as I also mentioned, with respect to, say, the pumping capacities, any of these variables that we're going to be serving up on the data portal will be sort of sliceable across the different scenarios and variables that we looked at. So when it comes with respect to the flood depths, those variables would be, like I mentioned, the pumping capacity. We also look at if we want to assume fragility on levees or not assume any fragility on levees. With respect to the non-structural projects, we assume different rates of participation. So we can identify all of the structures that could be candidates for non-structural mitigation, but we know that not every homeowner might be interested in participating. So what would that risk buy down look like if only 50% of the community participates? Or what would it look like if everybody participates in those non-structural mitigation measures? And so those sort of variables and scenario assumptions are what I mean by sort of what we can slice the data across. One additional thing that we're going to include, a lot of our reporting of damages is done on the expected annual damage term, which is sort of a statistical amalgamation of the flood exposures from all of the storms that we look at. We are also going to be providing the information at specific exceedance probabilities. And so if you would look at, say, year 20, its expected annual damages are in the top figure there for this community is something like $500 million with the plan in place. But if you would click on that, you can sort of expand that statistical amalgamation. You can expand the probability dimension there and see how much of those damages are coming from more frequent events that might have less impact, but they're occurring more frequently, versus less frequent events but more severe that have much bigger impacts but a smaller likelihood of occurrence. And so that sort of granularity is information that we have. It's information that we use. It's information that's important with respect to what design level these projects would ultimately be aiming for under construction. And so that information, again, is something that we're interested in making available to the public to better inform folks on how risk changes into the future and how we can help mitigate and reduce that risk with implementation of the master plan. Moving away from sort of this upcoming data access portal, we already have a bunch of other additional information and analyses available on our website and things that we've been presenting on now for some time. So some of the additional reporting beyond the main master plan document or those community or project fact sheets that Krista talked through. We also have a bunch of reports and technical documentation on our website. If you go to the master plan website, you can go to the technical appendices. The URL here is at the bottom of the page. And you'll find a lot of information there. Dozens of reports, thousands of pages of documentation. Some of them talk about documentation of the models themselves, the improvements we made to the models, outcomes of the models, the future without action, the future with master plan, sort of what sort of just the analysis that we've done, we have documented. We also have a bunch of stuff, and most of this is included in Appendix H, that we're calling exploratory analyses this time. And these are storylines or vignettes sort of specific dynamics of the coastal system that we think are of interest and are impacted by the master plan. And they're sort of a little bit more focused on a specific topic than sort of the full story of risk across the coastal zone that we tend to talk about in the master plan document. So some of those storylines that we're talking about, one would be high tide flooding. So we spent a fair amount of time looking at a few, I think 8 communities across the coastal zone, looking specifically at low-lying areas, roadways, and community assets to examine, not with respect to storm surges, but just during normal non-storm periods, how impacts of high water from high tide flooding will change over time as a result of sea level rise. And so these figures here on the bottom right would be some high tide flooding analyses looking at drive times to rural health clinics from different parts of the town of Amelia, just east of Morgan City. And so you can see sort of what the drive times would be without any high tide flooding events. So in clear conditions, most of the rural health clinics can be reached less than 10 minutes. Some areas 15 to 20 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes under normal conditions. Moving, if we would then look at a high tide flood event, you can see a large segment on the eastern side. There are roads where those communities would not be able to make it through flooding, and so they wouldn't have any access to a health clinic, and how that then may change moving forward in time at years 25 and year 50. You can sort of assess your your ability to access different assets in each community. We looked at health clinics, I believe gas stations, and maybe daycare centers, I think, are some of the asset types that we looked at drive time availability. Additionally, the other figure here in the top left are some storm flood depth or water surface elevations during storm surge events of historic storms. And so what we looked at, we took 5 historic storms: Ike, Rita, Barry, Ida, and Isaac. And we said, okay, this storm, it has historically occurred. It's something that people lived through. They can relate to what their impacts from that storm were. And so we take that same storm, or a sort of a statistically equivalent storm, and we say, what would happen if that same storm occurred on the year 50 landscape? So after 50 years of no action, how much worse would the flooding impacts be from that Hurricane Ike, for instance, 50 years into the future under the different environmental scenarios? And we can also then see how much that flood impacts would change if we had implemented the master plan. So sort of taking the impacts of the storms and the flood reductions that we could see by implementing the master plan, and taking them out of that sort of statistical framework that we use with the expected annual damages, and applying it to known storms. And so there's 5 different reports where we look at those different storms across the different storms that impacted different regions across coastal Louisiana. Similarly, we took storm surge modeling, and we looked at the impacts of barrier islands and how much barrier islands impact storm surge flooding in coastal Louisiana, and what would happen if we maintain those barrier islands, which is an assumption that we make for the future without action modeling runs, or what would happen if we didn't maintain them and those barrier islands were degraded. How does that impact storm surge? In the Barataria Basin primarily is where we focus that analysis. So that report is also available. We did a similar thing looking at coastal forests. How much do the swamps of the Maurepas Basin and Upper Barataria reduce the wind fields of hurricanes? And if we maintain those coastal forests versus losing those coastal forests, what would be the impacts on storm surge and winds in the coastal zone? And so those reports are all currently posted under Appendix H on our plan website there. The link is at the bottom.
So Eric, not sure if it's a good time right now, or we can wait more towards the end, but Mike Smith did have a question in the chat box, basically about the damage assessment. I don't know if we want to get into that now or give him a more detailed response later.
Yeah, so let's see. So the question was trying to understand the dollar damage estimates under various scenarios. Are those amounts possible under that specific year? I don't know if I completely understand the question, but the way that we calculate those dollar damage estimates are, so for any given year, we model the landscape changes into the future using the ICM. As the landscape changed, we then take that landscape at each decade, so years 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and we use that landscape to then model storm hurricane storms and tropical storm surges using AdSurf. We use a statistical sort of suite of storms. We model 90 different storms that each have some statistical relationships that are developed by FEMA and the Army Corps. It's called the Joint Probability Method. And so what we then get at each decade is sort of a wide range of exceedance flood depths, ranging from close to a 1 in 5 year storm out to almost a 1 in 5,000 year storm. So we have the damages that could occur from each of those storms, and then that's the statistical likelihood that that storm occurs. And so if you take the statistical likelihood and you multiply it by the damage, that would be the expected annual damage that you would get. So it's sort of, on average, this is the amount of storm flooding and the damages from that storm flooding that we would see in any given year. So it's not, it is possible, but it's not specifically a prediction of damages. It's sort of, it's the statistical amalgamation of all those damages from any storms that could occur in coastal Louisiana. And I will actually use that as a segue to, I'll skip this slide for now and go to this slide, where we have one of the other resources that we do have on our website under the outreach tab are a bunch of recorded presentations that we've given throughout the last 5 years while we've been updating our models and developing the 23 Coastal Master Plan. And so there's a lot of introductory and technical presentations that we have pre-recorded. Here I have some links to, say, the master plan public hearing that we gave during the public comment period earlier this winter, as well as the Master Plan 101. We have technical modeling webinars, which are really long, multiple hours, but those are the types of resources where the flood risk and damage modeling team will give a much better explanation of those expected annual damages than I have. So I would point you to maybe this piece of our website to have additional information provided. And then finally, one last thing that we do have, it's not true data, I suppose, but one thing that we've made a push for this time with transparency and making our model source code publicly available. So all of the model code for the ICM on the landscape side is hosted and open source on our CPRA GitHub site. The link is here. There's a picture of sort of all the model repositories that you can go and you can assess and access the modeling code base itself. We're still in the process of updating our code repositories for, say, the flood risk damage models and such, but all of that information is there, and there's contact information on that website. You can contact the team if you have interest in our source code and our models. They are available there, but again, I would point you to our website for the technical appendices and our pre-recorded presentations for more information. And at any time, if you have more questions, you can always reach out to the master plan team at masterplan@la.gov, and we would happily answer those questions when they come through. And I think that's all we've got today, but if there's more questions or comments, I guess we can take those, Jacques. I don't know.
Yeah, that's kind of all we have. We've got the Zoom up till 1 o'clock. And if anyone else is out there that would like to answer any questions subsequent to this technical webinar, you can reach out to the master plan team at the email address that Erica just mentioned. I think Krista had shown it in a slide earlier. We got a couple so far. I think one of them was more kind of general in nature about if we're going to have any meetings or recordings from the meetings posted. And then the other one from Mike Smith about the assessment of damages. I guess we'll give him a couple more minutes. And I saw Simone in attendance. I don't know if she's still here. Yeah, it looks like she is. I think it was at our board meeting. She had kind of applauded the team on making a very transparent, I guess, community engaging master plan this go around. I could not agree more with that. just seeing everything you guys just presented, all the way from the meetings with the libraries and providing copies to the folks via the community that way, to providing the open source code. I think it's just awesome, and all the way down to the community conversations that we had and everything. So definitely kudos to you guys there. Give them a couple more minutes. While we're waiting, y'all, we do have our fourth and final webinar that's going to occur tomorrow at the same time. It's the same meeting ID. This time it's going to be on something that doesn't really catch a lot of our spotlight, but that is huge. I think it's pretty interesting stuff. It's an update, just kind of a general overview, I guess, more so on our vegetative plantings program. Every project that we go and build, we do have some level of involvement in assessing how they vegetate, whether that be via manual plantings or assessments. We'll get more into that tomorrow. Shane Faust from the engineering division is going to be presenting on that. Yeah, y'all, if y'all have any more questions that you want to ask later via email, you can reach out via the resources we presented therein, and we will be posting this recording, sending it out via email blast after this week is over with. And I guess until then, y'all, will look forward to talking to y'all tomorrow at the virtual webinar session. Appreciate it, everybody. Thanks.